Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And I just want to introduce Ilaria, who is the lead of our Nature, Art, and Habitat Residency Program. And she can tell us about the program and then also introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, everyone, for joining NAHR 2025 Salon series. This year, the topic is mineral scaffolders that matter, and we have a webinar Salon series that starts today with our two new guests that I will shortly introduce. I like to take efforts to introduce NAHR in general, as is the first meeting we have. And I'll come back to Javiera and Tristan shortly. First of all, though, I would like to take a minute to really address what is recently happened to the Los Angeles city and county, and have a minute to really reflect on many human-induced issues and climate change-induced issues that we have faced recently. Fire was the topic of 2024, and we spoke also about the city of Los Angeles, and many of you have been part of the program. We still have some programming ongoing regarding fire, but of course, the thought today goes out to the families and the communities that have been affected and will continue in the months to come to be affected by the recent fires. Some of them are still ongoing. So yeah, it's just a moment to reflect on that, and we'll come back to it. In zooming out, I want to briefly share who we are and what we do. Many of you are friends and know about NAHR, but it's always nice to take a second to reflect on why we are doing what we are doing and what it means NAHR to us. Is really a laboratory of multidisciplinary practices that started in the Italian Alps about 11 years ago, and is a place where we aim to unfold and display a type of culture that relates to nature as a source of inspiration and a measure of available resources. We are interested in a multidisciplinary dialogue in a non-formal learning field work that values the rural setting and also position itself within a globally focused but locally inspired community. We, as per the words of Aldo Leopold, who has been for many of us an inspiration, his teachings, we like to think at the interconnectedness of all elements in the ecosystem that Earth is. What at NAHR we do is really to think of these global issues and apply our work at a local scale, and we do that in the summers in Italy and during the spring and fall in California. We are located north of Milan in the province of Bergamo. You might know of the famous mineral water Pellegrino, and that's a point of reference for many of us. And we are a large group that you see many of us connected here today, whom I want to thank first of all, but we are all over the world, from Australia to the United States, to, of course, Italy, Turkey, etc. And some of us are, again, here today. Some of us are asleep, so they cannot even be online at the same time of us. But we are all really connected through this idea that we want to be in nature to talk about nature. We are really interested in the interconnectedness of the ecological systems. We think that we need to do better in the way that we coexist among each other and within the ecological systems of nature. And so that's what brings us together here and then on site. We started as a residency program, but over the years we have achieved many other things, and our most current and latest is being the publication of our book, Transit of Coexistence. And we are currently developing programs and meetings. The next one will be with Roxanne Corda, one of the editors in the UK, on February 5th. You're all invited to join if you are there. The discussion of the book has touched many topics that we have touched in the past 10 years at NAHR, but they are continuing inspiring the conversations. Obviously, we are not alone. We have a network of friends and supporters, and we always want to consider and thank everyone that joins us. And if you are interested in knowing more about our calendar for 2025, I don't know why today is my mind 21, but it's obviously a mistake. Please follow us on social media. And we do have a couple of very interesting new entry in our programming. One is a hybrid residency for resident in Italy, and one is an eco-theater workshop. To all of you are invited to participate. Roxanne Corda is the leader on this, and again, please take a look. But in going back to minerals, the topic of this year and of today's starting Salon conversation, we have one peculiarity of NAHR is that we write a long call. Is a paper, is a statement, is an idea that gets unfolded for months and months. We work on it, and these are the first few sentences that really define what we understand to be minerals that are permeating all our lives in a way. They are in our bodies for the best functioning of it. They are part of our built environment. And they are the scaffolders of many forms of the elements that we see around us. We have, as I mentioned earlier, the opportunity to discuss and study and create around these topics in our residency in Italy and also in Southern California. In Italy, we are in the Taleggio Valley, and we meet there June, July, and August. While in California, we are hosted at the 3R Ranch by Sarah Graham and Mark Angelil in Santa Ynez, a couple of hours north of Los Angeles. Again, I'm not going into the details because I want to focus now on the Salon series. Today is the first of a few that will occur in the next months. The next one will be in February. As you are here, if you want to click on the RSVP on the QR code already. Otherwise, here we are, NAHR's participation, and the first one to participate to the 2025 series are Javiera Barandiaran and Tristan Partridge from UC Santa Barbara, where they have a Center for Restorative Environmental Works. And I'm now stopping sharing my screen, and I will allow Javier and Tristan to take it over by thanking them, of course, for being here and for joining the NAHR adventure, as they are also partnering with us in other activities. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you very much, Ilaria, and thank you to the whole team, and thank you to everyone for joining us. So, yeah, we are based at the Center for Restorative Environmental Work, which we set up at UC Santa Barbara. And our approach to the idea of restorative environmental work is not so much about ecological restoration, but really thinking about diverse collective strategies towards multi-species environmental justice. So what are the kinds of work and collaboration that are required and will be required to work towards multi-species climate and environmental justice? And so today we're going to focus on work that Javier has been leading around lithium. And this has included field work that we've conducted in the Atacama Desert in Chile, and also in Nevada, so 2 global sites of lithium extraction. And this is just a quick introduction to give you a sense of some of these places that we've spent time and been doing this research. And yes, we made a photo book in 2 halves. So one half is from the northern deserts of Chile, the other's from Nevada, to reflect how closely these parts of the world and these geological landscapes kind of mirror each other. And yes, we refer to them as lithium landscapes, but of course, any landscapes where lithium brines emerge are, of course, this kind of complex web of all kinds of mineral, microbial, flora and fauna life interacting. And so we were just very struck by spending time in these different areas of lithium brine extraction at the similarities. The infrastructure that's laid, the piping of brines out from underneath the surface in order to be evaporated by the sun to access and to create the kind of lithium deposits, which are then used and processed. But again, the kind of remarkable similarities between the geological forms and forms of life that occur in these really particular high desert landscapes. I guess I probably leave you to guess which is which, but on the left of the screen, as you're looking at it, that's actually in Death Valley, just over the border from Nevada, where we went to look at the lithium sites of extraction, and on the right is the Atacama Desert. And so similarly, we kind of emphasize this just to not only highlight the physical, geological, environmental similarities, but to also underline that when it comes to extracting lithium, it's some of the same players, the same technologies, some of the same companies that have enabled this extractive industry to grow globally. And so we're always thinking about the interdependence of minerals and animal and plant and life in different places, but we're also, in studying this from a social and economic and political perspective, looking at the interdependence of the industry itself. So what's happening around lithium in Chile and what's happening around lithium extraction in this country and in Nevada are completely interdependent, and we're really interested in better understanding and critiquing some of those connections. And with that, again, on the left, we have Silver Peak, Nevada, and on the right, trucks in the Atacama Desert. But with that, I will pass on to Javiera.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you. Thank you, Ilaria, and all the NAHR team for the invitation. We're very happy to be able to share this research with, this incredible group of people from all over the world. It was great to see everyone on the chat, Lithuania, Turkey, and then also friends here in Santa Barbara. So really, really great to see such a globally diverse group of people. Thank you for making time on a Sunday to spend with us. So I'm going to share a little bit from my forthcoming book called Living Minerals, Nature, Trade, and Power in the Race for Lithium. It will come out with MIT Press in the winter catalog, so maybe the December of this year or early 2026. But it is now officially in press, and I'm really excited. I think this is the first time I actually speak from the book now in press. So it's an exciting day for me. This book is the result of 10 years of research, both field work, as Tristan was showing in some of these different spaces, a lot of interviews with strategic informants, people who worked in the origins of this industry in the 60s and 70s. So I did a number of interviews with sort of historical players. But then also primarily it's a book based on historical archives in both Chile and the United States, and also some documents from Germany and a few other places. So it's a very historical book in that sense, and very much based on business archives as well. So I'm going to read the first paragraph of the book to introduce some of the topics that the book covers, and then I'm going to unpack some key ideas that are in this first paragraph. And I think that this photo is just a wonderful accompaniment to that first paragraph. While on a visit to Silver Peak, Nevada, home to the world's first brine lithium mine, Philip Comer, president of the lithium pioneer Foot Mineral Company, learned of a, quote, change in the political climate that kicked him into action. The date was September 1973. A new government had come to the fore in Chile, and Comer, along with Foot's men, left the desert of Nevada for the world's driest desert to negotiate access to the lithium in Chile's Atacama salt flat, which is pictured here. Standing on the razor-sharp salt rock, Comer's geologists, salt experts, and engineers drilled a test well, which you can see here, to extract the lithium-rich brine stored underground. The brine flowed so easily, 1,000 gallons per minute. It was like pumping from a lake. Comer's geologists knew that, quote, a veritable great lake of lithium lay waiting to be tapped. What attracted Comer to Chile that year was the change in government from Salvador Allende, who had completed the nationalization of nitrate and copper mines, to General Augusto Pinochet. The general took power in a violent coup and restored property and trade laws to attract foreign investment to Chile. Over the next decade, Foot and Chilean officials worked well together, but lithium mining proved harder than Comer would have liked. One reason was that lithium seemed destined to have a better future than its present. Scientists were using it in experimental nuclear fusion reactors and batteries for electric vehicles, which promised to transform, even revolutionize energy technologies. The otherwise anti-government Pinochet set limits on private industry. He declared lithium as, quote, strategic to the national interest, exploitable only through joint ventures, and capped extraction to safeguard future reserves. So as you can hear, this first paragraph covers quite a lot of ground, and I'm going to unpack some of it to introduce us to a few important questions that are a little bit difficult to answer and grapple with. So the first idea is this one of a veritable great lake of lithium. This has to do with the ecology of this place. The second big idea is that of a change of government from a socialist government to a right-wing pro-market government and what that meant for the mineral trade between Chile and the US. And the third idea I'm going to focus on is that lithium seemed to have a better future than its present, because already then in 1973, lithium seemed destined to be important for electric vehicles and for non-fossil energy technologies, and therefore of having this particular political and commercial importance. And I want to stress just how difficult it is to separate those two things, commerce and politics. So what do I mean by this veritable Great Lake of lithium? Here you have an aerial image of the brine extraction in Silver Peak, Nevada. So again, the world's first operation of this type. And then on the other side, you have an infographic that illustrates the process of extracting lithium from brines. So very briefly, there's three broad types of lithium deposits: hard rock, clays, and brines. I've been focusing on brines. I'm happy to talk more about the other two in the Q&A. But the reason that brines are interesting is that this is the cheapest form of lithium extraction. Everything else is more expensive. And as you know, cheap lithium is important in order to keep EVs cheap and batteries cheap. Evaporation ponds are fairly simple technology, but they require quite a lot of ecological and chemical and engineering knowledge of the specific place to actually work. One of the things that I find absolutely fascinating is that all of these salt flats, they might look very similar, but they are all unique in terms of the geomorphology of the place, the chemistry of the brines, the humidity, and so how evaporation operates. So it takes a lot of trial and error to learn how to operate in each place. The big thing here is water. And there's been a shift over the 10 years that I've been doing this research in thinking of these places as salt flats to thinking of them as high altitude desert wetlands. And that's a really important shift, because what it's signaling is that even though we can't drink this water, it's still water from an ecological perspective. So it maintains wildlife. It's a breeding ground for flamingos. It's where they feed. It sustains microbial forms of life, which were our very oldest ancestors. The first single-celled organisms to produce ozone and oxygen made all subsequent life on Earth possible. And there's huge debates about how to model the water cycle in these places, exactly how the brines flow or don't flow. And so what it means, the impacts of pumping in one place and of doing this evaporation essentially means you're evaporating water out of some of the driest places on Earth. And so that's the big question here. What does this mean for long-term aridity and the viability of life in these places as the water is evaporated out at an accelerated rate? So it's interesting that already in 1974, 75, they called this a lake because that's a big political debate right now. To what extent are these places really water systems or not? Initially, they were very aware that this was a water system. Okay. Second, a change in government. What I want to emphasize here is that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so when we think of minerals as scaffolders, one of the ways in which they provide scaffolding is as a basis for development. So in Chile, all governments on the left or the right have believed very strongly in mineral-based development. And so that's what you see in this mural here, celebrating life in a nitrate mining town, which today continues to produce both nitrates and lithium. To make a very long story short, and that story is most of what I cover in the book, Chile, like many other mineral-producing countries today, continues to believe in this promise of mining-based national development, despite a very mixed track record and big questions about its ecological sustainability. But what I want to emphasize is that the United States also has believed consistently, Republican governments and Democratic governments, in mining-based national development. In this case, where development was always dependent on easy access to cheap minerals. So not only lithium, but copper, bauxite. I'll continue. At many other minerals. And so this was important in the United States for advancing mass consumption, which after World War II became absolutely central for how the nation itself was imagined as delivering on the promise of capitalism through mass consumption. This, of course, created tensions between Chile and the US and other mineral-producing nations, but more importantly, I argue, it has locked us into a pattern of more mining for more goods at lower prices, at higher and accumulating ecological harms. This is true with lithium, but as I like to emphasize, we never use lithium alone. We always use it with more copper, more steel, more nickel, more of everything. And that's part of why mining itself is a big problem. Finally, a better future. And this is another sense in which minerals as scaffolders really matter. So development, of course, is about working towards a better future that's more prosperous, more equitable, clean, orderly, even more joyful. And during the 20th century, as captured in this drawing from 1967 of lithium and the electric car, this better future often meant more technology. Already in 1970, the LA Times wrote, quote, "Electric autos could revive ghost town," in reference to Silver Peak, Nevada, when that brine mine was getting started, the one that I pictured earlier and that Tristan showed. Before that, in 1964, at the World's Fair in New York, General Electric built an entire nuclear fusion reactor to demonstrate to Middle America the advantages of the all-electric kitchen. And nuclear fusion reactors use lithium to create a massive amount of energy. Neither nuclear fusion nor electric vehicles lived up to these expectations. Arguably, this is true even today. But the key point here is that because of its use in these two energy technologies, lithium always had a better future than its present. And this helps explain why lithium is so central to speculative imaginaries today, aided by also financialization, asceticization. And so it leads to all these discursive manipulations about how much lithium there is, whether it will run out, how important it will it be replaced, et cetera, et cetera. This brings me to my final point. Consumer technologies will never resolve the climate crisis because they depend on mass consumption, which depends on mass production of cheap goods. And because in order to be appealing, they have to advance the illusion of energy as cheap, clean, and infinite, when really in practice, it can be none of those things. In the book, I argue that we need to start seeing minerals as part of the living world rather than as inert or dead matter, which is what we have done historically, and that's what I analyze in the book. And I argue that we can do this by changing how we practice science. For example, instead of estimating lithium reserves, talk about how long it will be before brines and the life that lives there goes extinct, because those two processes are directly linked. Changing our mining memory. So if you think back to that mural, ways of honoring the past without celebrating it, recognizing that past aspirations for development and well-being might have been wonderful and important back then, but may no longer be desirable or feasible today. And changing our views of the future. So away from estimates of reserve and consumption and mineral needs, which are absolutely impossible to fulfill within our planetary boundaries, to focus on the society that we want to live in. And I really encourage you to read this Break Free from Mining report by Seas at Risk, which is, they propose a sort of an imaginative exercise to imagine what the world might be like in 2050 if we stop mining altogether. And then this decarbonizing Chile, if you go to our website that Tristan showed earlier, you can read more. That's a very nicely done ArcGIS story map that sort of puts together the increase in mining and the increase in renewable energy production in Chile and how these two things are really intimately linked. So that's all I have. We're available for questions.
Thank you so much. Wow, that's some really interesting stuff. Sarah, did you want to come off mute and ask your question? Oh, you went back on mute.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Javiera. I was wondering, you were saying that there was different ramifications for if the salt lands were defined as land or as a water system. As a water system, do they have more legal protections? Or is it just more complicated?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, there's no legal that I'm aware, and that will depend on each country. But that I'm aware in Chile, it wouldn't change necessarily the legal and the regulatory framework, at least not right away, maybe after significant effort and advocacy. But it does change the way people approach it. So it might change the way scientists approach the space, regulators. It helps change the conversation away from the salt flats as places of extraction that have a limited value, ecological value, because it's just a desert, to putting the emphasis on the ways in which they are really crucial to sustaining life in these places. So it's more about a a broader reframing than just a direct legal change. So hopefully legal change would follow, but not automatically.
Yeah, it's a really important question because there's parallels here with other extractive industries where the extractive industries, the operators, can divert attention from what they're doing, from the destruction that they're causing, by fixating and shifting the terms of debate to focus just on, in this case, whether lithium brines are considered water or not, in the same way that we see with oil extraction, sometimes debating whether natural seepage would continue or not, whether if the offshore oil extraction here in Santa Barbara were to stop. Whereas, the issue isn't just that. And with this debate about how the brines are categorized, it really gets, as Javiera mentioned, to how these things are seen, both by science and different practices of science, but also by people living there. And I think witnessing how extraction of lithium brines has disrupted hydrological activity and cycles in these places, that disruption is something that people living there have seen and witnessed. And whether or not those brines are categorized technically and scientifically as water or not, in no way undermines their lived experience of seeing that disruption. And so that's been, that question gets right to the heart of both how science is done, what counts as science and knowledge, whose knowledge and perspectives are taken seriously, and therefore, it gets right to the heart of the matter.
Thank you. I see Maristella raising her hand. If anyone else has questions, again, you can write them in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and then we'll just call on people in order. Maristella, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Javiera, I learned a lot for your presentation. I'm starting from a very naive point of view. I mean, usually, I'm an architectural historian. I look at the building, at the surface, and I always have the feeling that extraction industry, it's something that it's driving against the plan. I mean, that there is a tag of bad, difficult, dangerous for all of us. In a certain way, you explain it so well that this is almost a bias. I mean, there is nothing wrong about it. Also depends. And as a consequence of that, I remember I was once in Chile, and I went to one of these ghost towns for the production of these minerals, which is an incredible, from my point of view, landscape. Amazing. I will never go out of my mind. But now lithium, to me, again, it's like the key material of a kind of undiscussed war around, the different countries. So, and from your perspective, I almost find the idea that for Chile, it remains not only an important economically, but almost a very, relatively positive revolution. So I see all this contradiction, and I don't know, from my naive point of view, how do I look at them, or how do I understand better? Thank you.
Thanks, Maristella. That there's a lot there to think through, and I don't know that I have an answer necessarily, except to say that when I began this project, I was not expecting it to lead me to the nitrate towns, right? And so that those places that you saw of these ghost towns, like that mural that I shared, many of these have been abandoned now. They're in different degrees of ruin. Some of them, like the mural that I was showing, is actually celebrating a town called Pedro de Valdivia, which is abandoned. It was abandoned in the 2000s because it was too much toxic waste. The workers had to be evicted, but it's right adjacent to another town that is still operating, and to, facilities that are still in use. And people still go to this town after 20 years that it's been abandoned for rituals. So to celebrate birthdays, to celebrate, anniversaries of the passing of a loved one. The church and the main square were in perfect state, perfectly painted and watered. It was beautiful. And one of the things that that I reflect on in the book, and that Tristan and I have talked a lot about together, is the ways in which the ways in which it's important to remember these past cycles of ruin and decay. And we talk a lot about, when it comes to mining, boom and bust cycles. And those are real to some extent, but at the same time that in a country like Chile, there's a continuity and an accumulation that the boom and bust framework doesn't do justice to. And that I think is important in how people are remembering these places and thinking about, that's certainly very important in how people are thinking about lithium today. You're absolutely right. It is lithium at a national level, and I think the dominant perspective is that it is a very positive thing. In 2022, 23, and maybe also 24, lithium contributed more to the national treasury than copper, which is incredible. So Chile, has always relied on copper as its main source of public income, and in the last few years, lithium overtook copper. So it gives you an idea of just how important it is for the national economy and for the government in particular. Part of why that happened with lithium is because of the policies and the contracts that were negotiated in the 70s and the 80s. And so without that kind of state-led development and without those joint ventures, which are also very criticized today, we wouldn't have lithium contributing so much to the public purse. So for countries like Chile, it becomes really difficult in a way to try to balance, as how do you as a nation make this apparently impossible choice between selling your minerals and participating in economic life versus leaving them in the ground. And that's why I took this sort of global perspective that this is very much, we need to think about this as a trade problem. And we need to think about this as a long-term relationship with the consumer countries. And in that sense, this is really a question about climate injustice and climate debt, and the ways in which our comfort here is very directly related to destroying the livelihoods of people who have contributed the very least to climate change. So the indigenous peoples that live around the Salar de Atacama, who are losing their ability to practice herding and subsistence agriculture, which they have done for thousands of years in this area.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the images. Those relics, as you mentioned, of the ghost town, are really extremely strong, but it made you thinking a lot. So you contributed to something important. Thank you.
I don't know how to raise my hand at the moment.
I have a quick
Okay,
question,
go for it.
and then we can go for you, Ilaria.
Yeah,
So I don't know much about this at all. And I'm wondering, like, how close are we to being able to sort of mine lithium from, the waste, and like the recycled electronics and things, so that we can pull back a little bit, ideally, right, from the actual lithium mining.
Yeah, I wish we could say we were close to that, but we're not. And there's two problems. One is sort of the technological problems involved in figuring out how to extract lithium and recycle it. And part of the issue there is that lithium is still a relatively new industry. There's not a ton of it out there. It has this longer history, which is what I write about in the book, that very few people really know about. But it's still, compared to copper or iron or anything else, lithium is still traded, until very recently, it was still traded in pounds, not tons. So it has a particularly difficult chemistry. So there's all kinds of scientific, technological problems for why the recycling is, there's been huge efforts over the last 10, 15 years, but it's still really, difficult and kind of it's in its infancy. And a lot of technological boosters and people in science and material science will tell you we're working really hard and we're going to get there. But, looking at this as a historian of science, technology, and environment, these things just take a lot longer than the scientists will like to believe. The other big issue, which is arguably the really important one, or not arguably, really the really important one, is that the recycling never works. Because recycling is always premised on the idea that you're going to have more and more inputs, right? So you need the economics of recycling rely on having an ever-growing battery supply. The raw material needs to keep coming in to make recycling work at an economic level. And so all the recycling stories we have are really Band-Aid solution. So if we look at the recycling of lead acid batteries, which is arguably the best recycling story we have out there, it's still imperfect. It still relies on more and more lead acid batteries being produced. There's all kinds of leakage, where lead is, within the United States, the numbers look great because they're ignoring all the lead acid batteries that are being dumped in Mexico, for example. So recycling can temper things, but is not a solution. Yeah.
And just briefly to add to that, so in terms of some of the work that we draw on and that we're in dialogue with, so the ICTA Institute of Environmental Science and Technology in Barcelona, the Autonomous University in Barcelona, where Joan Martinez Allier and others are based, but his and their perspective is, the global economy is entropic, right? And so recycling always requires increasing amounts of energy. And so the energy production to even then do the work of recycling, that energy system itself has huge demands for inputs and resources. And so and that ends up being this, a counter argument to, as Javiera mentioned, the kind of eco-modernist take, which is, the technological advances will ultimately lead to a reduction in resource use, whereas, we've seen certainly over recent decades that the opposite is true. And actually, in which, so Frank in the chat mentioned, this treadmill of production. And so, the other thing I think about recycling is it doesn't actually change any of the systems or relations of production. It just enables how things are being done at the moment to continue, just with a slightly different source of some of those inputs. Feeding that treadmill, feeding that path dependency. And there's a question from Maya Weeks in the chat that I'd like this to address, but also Ozan, you had your hand up.
I also want to, before we move too much forward, sorry, I want to interject to go back to Javiera's answer to Maristella. When you use the we, Javiera, that, I'm curious to understand who the we would be. And I am playing this game, putting you on a spot of saying, what if you were in charge of putting together a task force? We have seen, COP, UN, endless conferences. I still reference 1992 as the starting of any conference in the world, and that was maybe the most successful, but here we are. And so what if you are in charge of a task force? I'm looking at extraction, really at the starting of all these. Who are these we, and which are the first three actions in the agenda? If you want to play and dream about it. If not, let's skip it and keep going.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ilaria. I don't remember the exact sentence I used, and so the exact we that you're referring to, but I think it's always a good question, and it's certainly something in writing the book. I would like just search for we to make sure I stamped it out and added that level of clarity each time. I think that we as scholars, so now here talking as a university professor and a scholar in the environmental justice and climate justice literature and space, I think we still need to get better at how we talk about the intersections and differences and interdependencies and similarities between local and global justice questions. There's a very robust movement and activism, organizations, and literature and scholarship that is very rooted at the local level and looking at injustices and these issues very locally rooted. And there's also pretty robust literature looking at this globally through, the UN treaties. Connecting those two streams of work and both research work and activism work has I think, a lot of people do it, but it's still, I think, a challenge. So that's one we, that's my natural we, because I'm a professor and a scholar. So normally if I say we, that's who I mean. But then there's the we of, the global North, wealthy consumer, which part of what I try to do also in the book is trouble that by really, and part of what we do in the photo book, Tristan and I, is demonstrate, that Silver Peak and Atacama are also similar in terms of the poverty that exists in these places, the industrial ruins, the ruins of consumption and of capitalism that really overwhelm life in both of these places. So yes, there's the wealthy global consumer, which includes, many of us here in the Zoom room. But then within the global North, within the United States, there are similar sacrifice zones and sacrificed communities that are treated as, disposable in the same ways as some of the communities in the Atacama Desert, and who live, that poverty, not in the same ways, but similar experiences. And so, how do we use our power? Those of us who have it. One of my big areas of work recently has been to think about what's the role of scientists in all of this. That's, my training is in science and technology studies, and thinking through the role that scientists and experts play in these processes. I have a co-authored article with Chilean colleagues that we call Strength Out of Weakness, where we argue that scientists need to recognize they're not as powerful as they think they are in a world, as President Biden said the other day, in a world of oligarchs and the technology, AI, industrial complex. Scientists are not, they're not the physicists of the Cold War era. They don't have that power anymore. And certainly ecologists and biologists and so many of the scientists involved in the IPCC, they're increasingly talking openly about their frustration at their lack of political power. So we sketch out in that article different things, what we call epistemic strategic actions. And that's part of also then in the book, I write about the ways in which we need to do science differently. And so that reframing, for example, from salt flat to wetland, there's a lot of power there. And so grasping that power by reframing and reclaiming life itself, recentering life itself in our legal schemes, in our teaching, in our research, it's not a minor move. And I guess I have more faith in that long term than in international treaties, which I feel have failed us time and time again. Certainly right now, I have no illusions about the possibilities for international cooperation given political changes in multiple countries. So I think figuring out how to work together as activists, as researchers, and sort of in non-state capacities is going to be really fundamental in the next few years. And questioning these false solutions of more consumption, that this idea that the dream of everyone in a single family home with an EV charger. And LA right now is going to be at the front lines of that in terms of how does LA rebuild? And I think there's an opportunity to rebuild in the same old way, or an opportunity to rebuild really thinking towards, the kinds of cities we want to live in.
Yeah, and the toxic waste of it.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. We'll come back to the COP task force list. To go back and to you and the questions on the board, and then to Oz, and maybe, I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, let's start with Maya. Do you want to come on and say your question, or we can just jump right in? Yeah.
Sure. Good morning, everybody, or good whatever time of day it is for you. Nice to see you all, and thanks for this event. I am really interested in I've been really interested hearing about the economic implications, of course, of lithium and everything that's been discussed so far. And it's leading me into this current moment question of, what do we do when, say, there are emergency events that are unplanned for, like tens of thousands of electric cars catching on fire in Los Angeles? And I'm laughing only because it's like hysterically unimaginably bad, right? Or the Moss Landing power plant that is on fire right now. I think it's still burning, something like 4 days later. There's no news. And it's becoming increasingly clear that I'm a researcher. I just kind of assumed that public officials, government would have emergency procedures in place for events like this. It's becoming increasingly evident that they don't. And so I'm wondering if Tristan and Javiera, since you specialize in lithium studies, if you know if there's any way to summarize toxicological effects, or if there's any sort of like umbrella message that you can deliver to those of us who don't specialize in that particular in lithium. And sorry for my clumsy question. I'm not really super awake yet.
Great to see you, Maya. Good question. And yeah, Moss Landing is shocking. There's no news about it at all. I just saw it, kind of through a tiny headline that sort of floated through something I was reading. And then I went to the LA Times to look for information, nothing. I looked in the Washington Post, New York Times, nothing. And this is really important. It's not the first time that there's a major fire. So Moss Landing, very briefly, was a gas-fired power plant in Monterey Bay. It was one of the largest, many ecological impacts there, particularly on marine wildlife. And then it was decommissioned in the last, within the last 10 years, and transformed, sort of repurposed into a massive storage facility. So it's a massive battery to basically store excess solar power that California produces during the day, store it so it can then be used during the night. And I think this is the second time it has caught fire. So our colleague, I've just blanked on his name.
Dustin Mulvaney.
Dustin Mulvaney, our colleague Dustin Mulvaney, he's been doing research on this and he's been following this. He's at San Jose State. And so to answer your question, toxicology, not a lot is known. Someone said in the chat, yes, lithium is used in pharmacology. So there's a little bit there in terms of sort of that, low and not so low dosage. So we know it does have both, it's been used as a mood stabilizer. So it has some benefits for treating bipolar disorder and manic depression. But it also accumulates in the body and has physical harms. In my research, I came across just one statement by a woman, and I included it in the book to keep this documentation with us, and I like to repeat it because it's important, but I just found one statement of a woman in Nevada saying her husband, who worked in the lithium mines, died from inhaling too much lithium. So from inhaling what I'm assuming are the salts that are left over that have different kinds of entrapped elements, including lithium. But I haven't found any research on, health impacts for workers, for miners. The mining industry will, not incorrectly say the greatest risk they face is solar radiation and sort of sunstroke and things like that. So we know in a way very little. We do know that these fires, or when these batteries catch fire, that is very toxic, and that has huge impacts. And Dustin, just in conversation, he's told me a little bit about how absolutely toxic they are. And in the Bay Area, when these fires have happened, there's been communities that have been evacuated, school closures, and things like that, because it is a really toxic plume. So much more research is needed. Also, I'll say, strictly speaking, those batteries do not have to be lithium. The point of lithium is that it's lightweight. And so it's necessary for batteries on the move. So for anything in your pocket and cars. But if it's a stationary battery, there's probably better things that we could be using, that are less are easier to work with than lithium.
I hadn't thought about that. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Ozan, do you want to come off of mute and state your question?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Javier. Wonderful project, and congratulations on the book. Looking forward to it. I want to go back to the social movements aspect of it. You mentioned the role of the scientists and also these international agreements that you trust less, and I agree with you on that. My question, could you elaborate what is going on in the field? Are there any resistance movements historically, present time? And could you also elaborate if there are potential imminent political mobilization around the extraction? And one last thing, are there any perhaps differences between United States and Chile in that regard in terms of mobilization? Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Barbara Galindo, who's here, who has a lot more to say about social movements of resistance in different parts of the Americas. So her research is really focuses on that, and also drawing connections across different minerals. So sort of kind of breaking the silo of talking about one minerals in isolation from each other. There's many social movements, and there's a lot of resistance to mining. So there's a lot I could say here, but to try to be really synthetic. I think some important things to keep in mind is that resistance to mining is strongest when mining is coming in new to an area. And so it's very difficult for communities where mining already exists to really mobilize against it. And that makes the Salar de Atacama, so this specific place in Chile that I've been talking about, a little bit unique, because they have been living with mining for a long time, and with lithium mining for a long time. It got started, at a time when, no one would have really, I have not found any resistance, opposition to mining in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. Or even, before that, there was always a very pro-mining perspective in Chile at that time. So it's really after the 1990s when mining really begins to expand and to become even more intensive and to grow beyond a certain scale. And it's really after 2006 in Chile that people begin to, at the local and national level, really question the role of mining and how smart it is to just mine ourselves into the future and what is going to be left at the end of the day. So that's kind of the bigger perspective. In that sense, the Atacama is a bit exceptional because they've been very resisting lithium mining very forcefully, even though they have been living with it for a long time already. In the United States, so in Silver Peak, there's no resistance to lithium mining that I have been able to find or register, but there is a lot of resistance in the Thacker Pass mine, which is nearby. It's a hard rock mine that's absolutely huge. And I think there will be resistance there's different projects to mine around what currently exists in Silver Peak. I have big questions. I really do not think there's a lot more lithium there for them to mine. But there's been, I think there will be opposition movements to those new projects that are coming in. There's a global, so there's strong local movements. They're very globally connected as well. And in that sense, I think, the Seas at Risk report is a really good place to start. They really review a lot of academic scholarship and also reference the work of, NGOs and community groups around the world that are doing a lot of this work. There's a number of documentaries or films out there. Yeah, so Barbara just posted some in the chat. Which is also just really interesting. I think we're living at a time when it's so much easier to produce media, and you have a lot of communities and social groups that have been using that quite successfully. So I think in that sense, we're in a different world than, for example, the world I grew up in, where questioning mining was a really kind of an insane thing to do. It was not a mainstream thing at all. And now there's a lot more space for that.
Great. Thank you. Barbara, did you want to come off mute and add some comments?
Yeah, I just, yeah, I'm at home. Let me go to another room so I can be more focused. I just put on the chat the Plurinational Observatory of Andean Salt Flats, where you can find information, a lot of materials like videos, documentaries, and recent books on including indigenous, the resistance of many indigenous peoples that live in the desert of the Atacama Desert. And there I have like a list of documentaries on this issue, like including Brazil, which is where is a hot topic right now in the state of Minas Gerais, in a very desert environment too, the Vale de Jequitinhonha. So yeah, I have done research on the on two indigenous peoples in Argentina, who are the Coya and Atacama indigenous peoples. So this documentary, In the Name of Lithium, is about their resistance. I don't know if they continue to be so united. They were like 33 communities who were very united against I would say not lithium mining specifically, but the effects of lithium mining, right? And all this, what Javiera mentioned about the depletion of aquifers, which they can see and they measure through media. This is important. In each documentary that they participate in creating, right? Even if they're not the authors of the documentaries, their interest is really to register, to have a visual register of the depletion of aquifers. So this is what I found very interesting in these documentaries and these videos and about lithium extraction in this region. So yeah, that's what I can mention more documentaries and videos here. Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara. Yes, please type it on the chat if you would like. We still have about 10 minutes to a couple of more questions, maybe if there are, or some other thoughts. Anyone, or Ozan, I don't know if you had a follow-up point or.
I just had a follow-up on the question or the comment about that lithium is also used for pharmaceuticals. What is the is it just the tiniest little percentage of that, I would imagine, of the whole thing?
Yeah, so through the 1950s, which is when they began using, there's a longer history of using lithium as a pseudo-pharmaceutical. So for example, like 7-Up had lithium. or Lithia, like it's not absolutely clear, but it was sort of inspired on these sort of lithiated waters. And so there were different springs and sort of hot springs in different parts of the world, particularly in Europe, but also in the US, of going to these lithiated waters to recover from the stressors of modern life. But it's in the 1950s that it begins to be used sort of in what we would call like modern psychiatry. My understanding, and so it's the percentage of its use has declined, and today it's very small. In part, also my understanding is that there's much better alternatives these days that are much more sort of much better suited, more fine-tuned. And so, the way someone described it to me is lithium in psychiatry was kind of like a bomb, right, into your body. It was very, it was kind of this brute force, versus now they can really do much more calibrated medications for mental health conditions. So I think it's still used primarily in other countries, whereas in the US or Europe, they have better pharmaceuticals for manic depression. Yeah.
Thanks. Does anyone else have any questions? Maybe one more, if we have anybody. Otherwise, maybe Ilaria, do you want to?
Yes, I'm going to share the screen and then have a minute to connect with everyone. So first of all, thank you very much, Tristan and Javiera, and we are excited that your book is, almost there for the public. So we are looking forward to seeing it. Do you see my screen? I'm having a
We see your screen, but it's also shows your edit.
So we are looking forward to the book, and we are really honored that was the first talk on the content. So thank you again for joining us. And Tristan and Javiera have been joining Santa Ynez in the past and will continue with the new programming. So we are really happy about the partnership with CREW, or CREW, how you may say the acronym. Thank you. And just to stimulate and keep going with the Salon conversations, we want to announce the next two. The next one will be with an artist and activist on February 23rd. We will send out the Eventbrite link, but this QR code, if you point it with your phone, takes you already to it if you want to sign up today.
I also just put the link in the chat as well.
Thank you. And then we will have another one in March with another artist, and we thank you also Sarah Valeri, another of NAHR ambassador, that will co-host and connect us to these two people. And we will have one more possibly in April. But today was wonderful. We had many people and a very interesting conversation. So thank you everyone for being here. And some of the conversation also reminded us of some of the points that are in our book, and we want to keep in mind that the book conversations also will continue to happen both virtually. We are thinking of a book festival at the end of April, and also we have continued presentations. Last week we were in Istanbul, hosted by Hara and Kokopelli, and we are thanking you. We see you here also, and we will have another one in February in the UK. Roxanne, as I mentioned earlier, will share more information about these. So thank you everyone. Really, it has been, if you wish to come out from the and be online. I'm gonna stop sharing and be on video for a second to join and say goodbye, everyone. It would be lovely. did I stop sharing? I don't know if I did.
Yep, you did. You're good.
Great. So anyway, thank you again, everybody, for being here. We kind of kick off 2025 with some very interesting conversations, and the disruption of the fires are in our mind all the time, but we still need to think even more so maybe about environmental issues, technology, our roles in the world, and what we can really do to do better as we continue in our professions and personal endeavors. So thank you again, and see you next time.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions and for being here, and all the best to everyone in LA.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.